course, inflation. We got the news today, it's fallen. It was 3.4%. It's now fallen to 3.2%. Were there a tiger, some people will say, because it was predicted and expected to fall to 3.1%, but that didn't happen. Anyway, though, we are kind of going in the direction. The direction feels like it's the right one. Rishi Sunak said that he would halve inflation. He's ticked that box and then some. Do you think that we're in a good position right now with all this or not, Quentin?
Well, I think it could be worse. But I'd like to see inflation lower. And the thing that strikes me is that petrol prices seem to be going up again. And that seems to be perhaps linked to what's going on in the Middle East. Our economy is just a very small fry compared to the general Western economy, which is it's affected by the things like closing off shipping difficulties in the Middle East. And the whole oil price is affected by Middle Eastern crisis.
Of course.
So those sort of things are not very helpful at the moment.
Well, this is why when we were talking about the whole situation, when people were talking about Israel and asking them to show restraint or whatever when it comes to responding to what Iran did, and we did a whole piece on this, and a few people getting in touch saying, oh, Michelle, focus on UK matters.
Yeah.
And I was trying to say, believe you me, what happens in the Middle East will absolutely affect people here in the UK, whatever they think to that conflict and whatever side they're on, irrelevant. Even just economically, it will affect people.
That's absolutely right. Well, look at the early 1970s. You have a conflict involving Israel. You have a subsequent embargo of oil by the OPEC countries, primarily in West Asia, towards Europe. You see a massive price rise with regards to oil, massive runaway inflation. You cannot imagine a world of Margaret Thatcher and the turn against the Keynesian state, as we like to call it, of the 50s, the 60s, the early 70s. That doesn't happen, certainly not in that way, without the oil crisis of the early 70s. So oil prices are fundamental. And the idea that, this doesn't matter with regards to Iran. Iran's doctrine of self-defence, if the proverbial really hits the fan, is to close down the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, and the Strait of Hormuz. And you're looking at around 35-40% of globally traded oil, if that happens. You would see a price spike, I think, probably quite similar to the early 1970s. Now, that's highly unlikely, but it is probably important context for people when they say, we should just care about here at home, because there are big implications with regards to what happens in the Middle East for us here in the UK.
Do you share this view? We've just been in the news headlines as well. We've just seen Cameron there with Netanyahu.
Those pictures were glorious.
I was just about to say, you made a comment to me, which the viewers won't have been able to hear because we was listening diligently to Polly instead. What were you saying?
Well, the photographs showed Lord Cameron, bouncing up and down in his chair, trying to engage Benjamin Netanyahu in conversation, and Netanyahu looking daggers at our Foreign Secretary. I get the impression, I think I'm right about this, is that the Israeli Prime Minister thinks that our Foreign Secretary is a grade 1 turkey and has no time for him at all. And Lord Cameron's been pushing some quite a sort of a surprisingly Israeli sceptic line from the government recently. Sunak seems much more keen on Europe, on Israel than Cameron does. And I just don't think Netanyahu and Cameron are made for each other. I think they should be kept as far apart from the butter knives as possible.
Do you think that's fair, Netanyahu's position, or actually Cameron's view of being potentially anti-Israeli?
Anti-Israel is a strong term. I agree with what Quentin said. I think it's far more critical of Israel than perhaps one might have anticipated. He's probably led the way more than Keir Starmer has. I think he has said certain things, and actually in the slipstream of Cameron and Biden, Starmer's followed. You would have thought, given their respective electoral coalitions, Starmer would say something which is actually leading the way with regards to Cameron. That's not been the case. So I think that's right. However, there was that story in the FT that the Israelis wouldn't have time to speak to our people. And I think, look, you have the Royal Air Force bringing down ballistic missiles, bringing down Iranian drones. That costs the taxpayer in this country money. We lost 3 of our people, our aid workers in Gaza, killed accidentally. That's what the IDF said. It's not fine, but they've given an explanation. I think, frankly, we should have done more in response. But OK, given all that, I find it utterly remarkable that Netanyahu can say, sorry, I haven't got time. Because without the US Air Force, without the Royal Air Force, that attack by Iran on Israel would have looked fundamentally different.
But has there actually, speaking of those aid workers, those British ones, has there been an independent inquiry as to what went on there, or just the Israeli inquiry?
Here's the remarkable thing. I mean, isn't it crazy? You lose 3 of your people, 3 ex-service personnel, and they say, investigate yourselves. There was also a Pole, an Australian and a US-Canadian dual national that were killed, as well as a Palestinian. As I understand it, the only independent investigation thus far is by the Polish government or the Solicitor General into the death of the Polish national. I don't understand for the life of me why we can't do something similar in this country, but there you are.
I thought it was a bit odd, that response to this.
It only happened very recently. I think, one might be... you've got to remember as well that the Israelis are feeling... They are. They're in a war, and they're fighting for their country. And sometimes we've got to put ourselves in that position. If we were in the position where we had 300 Iranian missiles being fired at us, now, we might not take very kindly to people from the Labour Party of another state saying that we shouldn't be defending ourselves. So I'm very sympathetic I'm trying to be sympathetic to all sides in this. But I think the Israelis, you've got to bear in mind that they're fighting for their country at the moment.
Let me bring it back to UK inflation then, because Rishi Sunak, of course, he made this one of his pledges, as we've just been saying. But I just wonder how much is this due to the efforts of Rishi Sunak, this kind of fall in inflation? And yes, by the way, at home, you'll say, Michelle, inflation falling doesn't mean that everything's getting cheaper. It just means that they're rising less fast. I know that. But how much of this is to Sunak's credit?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? When inflation skyrockets, the government says we can't do anything. It's the Bank of England which is responsible for interest rates and inflation. And when it's a good news story, it's all us. Partly it's because of the government, partly it's because of the Bank of England. But fundamentally, the inflation that we were seeing 18 months ago, 2 years ago, was fundamentally because of issues beyond their control, primarily energy prices. Those have come down. So somewhat, they didn't make the problem worse, and that's okay. That's a good thing. Politicians often do that. But yeah, they shouldn't be taking the whole plaudits by any means.
I think you can give them credit for a general sense of economic stability and for the public sector pay, keeping those pay settlements a bit lower than the public sector wanted. So I think that... But the Bank of England, actually, the Bank of England's a pretty ropey place at the moment, and the governor is a loose tooth.
Do you think that the Bank of England should cut the base rate then?
Yes, I do, although it is looking a little less likely now that the inflation didn't go down quite as much. But I think they should have been much more optimistic. Yeah,
it was predicted to go fall to 3.1%, and actually it was 3.2%.
But they will seize... I get the impression the Bank of England is eager to seize any opportunity to be pessimistic.
Yeah, and I think there were predictions that there would be quite a few interest rate cuts this year. I think people have very hastily kind of re-evaluated those predictions, predicting perhaps just one. Do you think the Bank of England has been a little bit too overcautious in this? And let's listen. We've just been talking about how much credit Sunak, etc., should be given. Let's listen to what Rishi Sunak had to say today.
Taxes have been cut by £900, state pensions gone up, free childcare has been expanded, wages have risen for 9 months in a row, Mr. Speaker, and just today, inflation down again to 3.2%. Our plan is working and the Conservatives are delivering a brighter future for Britain.
Let's listen then to what Rachel Reeves had to say in response.
I think that the reasons for the falls in inflation are down to what's happening in some of the global markets. But the truth is that people are still worse off after 14 years of Conservative government. And this will be the only parliament where living standards are lower at the end of the parliament than they were at the beginning. That is the legacy of 14 years of Conservative government.
Nodding along then, Aaron Bastani.
I'm not the biggest fan of Rachel Reeves. When she's right, she's right. On tax cuts, yes, there were major cuts to national insurance, but if you earn less than £26,000, you've not seen a tax cut. If you earn more than 60 grand, you've not seen a tax cut. If you're a pensioner, you've not seen a tax cut, because, of course, they also move the thresholds around. Childcare is a good move. They should be commended for that. But the fundamental thing here, and it's a subtext to what Rachel Reeves just said, is interest rates. If you have remortgaged your home, as I had the misfortune of doing around the time of the Liz Truss premiership.
Oh, yeah, so did I. Cool. Nightmare.
And you are £400 or £500 worse off as a result, purely on your mortgage, plus energy, plus food.
And do you blame
it's very hard.
Do you blame the government specifically for your mortgage going up?
I think, well, I would certainly blame Liz Truss if, I think we need to reassess interest rates and inflation in this country. So right now, inflation, the target's 2%, and we won't really see cuts to interest rates until it's around there. I think that's too much. I think in the medium term, that figure should be between 3 and 4%, because you're basically allowing for a long-term economic stagnation. I don't think that helps anybody. I think an interest rate cut right now, probably another one, would be a tonic. We'll maybe see one later this year. And by the way, that's the #1 reason why I think the Tories are really screwed.
And you just said that your mortgage went through the roof. Do you blame the government for that?
I blame Andrew Bailey a lot, actually. The governor of the Bank of England was a really unimpressive, dithery type. And also an extremely boring man, but that's by the by. Perhaps you want the governor of the Bank of England to be boring, but my goodness, he wins prizes at it. But he doesn't radiate any sort of control or vision or belief in our country. And I blame him. I mean, Liz Truss, I think the blame for her has been possibly slightly overdone. I don't know.
Yeah, I think she became a very convenient scapegoat, Liz Truss, isn't she? Lee says, Michelle, prices are still rising and many people are suffering. It wasn't Rishi that's got inflation down. It's nothing to do with the Tories. But did you think it was anything to do with the Tories when inflation was going up, though, Lee? Tell me your thoughts on that. Les says we'll never get inflation down to a completely low level if wages keep increasing, because then we go round in a wage price spiral.